Oh, it's on. It's on.
Is it
Yeah, they
usable?
recorded all of that.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Hopefully you didn't hear me say the F word.
Yeah, again.
No, I mean fart. Like my kids were like, Daddy, he said the
He did
F
it.
word. And
He
I'm like,
did it.
he did. And
Well, Paul will bleep it out if you want him to.
yeah, no, it went against the grain for me to even say it. Toot is what we always say around my
Yes,
house.
good. Thanks for cleaning it up.
Even my 8-year-old's like, no, it's not that. It's a fart. I'm like, no, it's a toot.
Well,
You gonna open us up with a cold story?
you know,
or
I
you
don't.
feel
I
like
don't
the
think I
cold
need to
story is come and
anymore.
gone?
I
All
really
right.
don't think I need to.
I agree. You can dive in.
Well, okay, everyone, thank you. There's no camera to look at. Thank you so much for joining another episode of The Sage. I am joined with none other than the Silver Fox himself, Robert Beckman. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you out there.
And we mustn't forget the smartest man in the room, our producer Paul.
Producer Paul, brother
Yeah,
Paul,
and he's working overtime.
and sound engineer Paul.
Yeah, he's actually, we were like working on stuff for the podcast today, some like behind the scenes admin stuff, and I got a bigger appreciation for just what he does, and it's quite a lot. So, thank you, smartest man in the room.
Some would say
I
it's
need
work.
to know how we qualify that.
What's that?
Smartest man
Smartest
in the room.
man in the room.
Well, let's start
I mean,
it off by saying,
are we doing IQ or
well, you know,
who could win on a Jeopardy?
like I would say the best I could give you is the vibe. You know, like he just has that smartest man vibe.
Even if he's dead wrong, you just believe he's
Right.
right.
That well, yeah, of course, he's the producer.
Yeah, you give him the nod.
Growing up, they just called him a smarty pants, but it turned out it's actually a gift.
It is. It is.
They said it in a derogatory fashion, but he showed them he's actually the smartest in the room.
And we're joined with Darin Saley today. Darin, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. So glad to be here. Thanks.
Well, happy to
Thanks
have
for
you.
having me.
Oh, you're welcome.
I don't mind being had.
No, thank you for thanking
You know,
me.
it's funny because you came to my mind when we're kind of making a list of people we'd love to interview on the podcast, and I think of the first time I ever met you, and my wife and I went to you for counseling, and we sit down, and Darin looks at me dead in the eyes, and he says, "So how long have you and your girlfriend been dating?" And I'm thinking in my mind, like, does he not know that this is my wife? Like, I thought it was pretty clear. And I was like, oh no, I don't have a girlfriend. He's like, yeah, exactly. That's the problem. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, he's playing chess. He's playing chess with my mind. I was supposed to say I do have a girlfriend because I still date my wife.
The old forgot to date his wife.
Many a men end up in my office.
Hey, Thomas, you're not the first and you won't be the last.
Oh, praise
Although I
God.
will say, if anybody listens to this podcast first, it might cut back on some of that. Now they know it's coming. Thanks.
Well, that's true.
You took his shtick.
Help a brother.
Yeah, help a brother. What are you're going to have to give him something to replace that with?
Maybe I will. We'll talk afterwards.
Yeah.
So as a sage, I mean, I feel like to earn sage status, it helps if you're around a lot of people in a lot of situations. So, Darin, you spend a lot of time counseling with folks. It could be marital, it can be life, it could be spiritual crises. But you have the advantage of seeing a wider gamut of humanity. And I think that helps, actually. I think it helps a lot because often we're lost in our one-person world. And whatever is a big deal to us at the time, we think, oh, man, the whole universe must be spinning on this one issue. Sure. But when you get to see a broader section, you can notice trends, you can see like similarities, and then you can say, nope, that was just you, man. Nobody else is struggling with that one.
Sad to say, just you.
Has your years in counseling given you a lot of perspective in that regard?
Well, I'm going to preposition here with counseling in my world is actually limited to folks who have a license. Now, if you look at Christian counseling or biblical counseling, pastoral counseling, they'll use that interchangeably with what I do, and that's coaching. So I'm a certified relationship coach / educator. But yeah, to your point, there's a lot of folks with a lot of issues, and I just happen to be one of them.
What are some of the predominant things that you coach people on?
So really, I was talking to somebody today. Mostly what people will end up in my office for is for romantic relationships, right? Marriage, premarital. But if you think about it, the same principles, truths, tenets, skills that are involved in a romantic relationship are involved in every relationship.
That's true.
Listening, speaking, personality, core fears, love languages, caress needs, all those things that make for good relationships, honesty, integrity, communication, all those things that trip us up in any relationship happen, of course, in marriage. It may be a little exaggerated because the stakes are somewhat higher. Usually your mom won't divorce you. Thank you for laughing.
Thank you to both of you out there, and also for Thomas, the third, who chimed in. Actually, I'd love for you to riff on that just a little bit. So a lot of folks out there listening and or the people that Thomas and I interact with, they're probably, let's say they're single. Let's say they're somewhere in their 20s. And what you just said, I think, is a great point, because they would say, well, wait, there's this other world I'm going to enter into one day. It'll be called a relationship, and it'll be called figuring out this romantic thing with my future loved one. Mm-hmm. But in the here and the now, they might not draw the correlation between, no, it's the same character traits, all the skill sets that you just mentioned. So I love that, because I do think it kind of emphasizes, like, don't wait until you meet that person in hopes that they're somehow gonna like straighten you out, fix you, make it all right.
Sure,
it's
Jerry
really
Maguire,
not very nice.
Yeah, he might not have
You
been.
complete me,
You don't
yeah.
complete me.
You don't complete me.
If I needed you to complete me, we're in trouble.
If both of them were
Or
honest,
if you're waiting on me.
yeah, then they could have said, wow, I wish you would have got your act together before I met you. That would have been much nicer. You could have brought a whole person to the relationship, which would be very different. So when you think about like a typical, let's just pick not a stereotype, but a case study. Let's go someone in their later 20s, single, probably a couple years from marriage, don't necessarily even know who they might want to marry one day. So what are some of the things that, if you could speak into their world and go, yeah, pay attention to these things, because later you're really going to be glad that you've developed that part of your life?
Well, I think it's both interpersonal and with what I'd noticed from the other party, right? There's the skill sets I need, but I can also observe them and know if those are yellow flags, red flags. The what we would say, at least for premarital counseling, coaching, would be, you should become the person that you're looking for is looking for.
That's
Okay,
good.
work your way through that. But that if I'm focused on trying to find Mr. or Mrs. Right at the expense of not being Mr. or Mrs. Right, then I'm going to mess up the math, because normally in math we think about a half plus a half equals a whole, and yet in relationships that's not true, right? If you're jacked up and I'm jacked up, when we get together, that doesn't make us whole. That just makes jacked up squared.
I think it's called reality television, but yes, it's
Absolutely.
It doesn't usually go well. I like that a lot, and I love how your best statement. It's horrible English, but it is very true. Be that person, and then I also like what you said about being able to learn this skill set of picking up what's going on in the lives of others. Because I do think that there's like. There's times where it's like, well, I don't want to. You talking about like being judgy? I'm like, I'm not talking about being judgy. I'm just talking about the ability to look at another human being and go, man, that's a hot mess going on right there. Or, wow, this is a wonderful human being that's growing before the Lord right now.
Right, and we can do that together. I think of an acronym that one of the, because I'm just a cacophony of what I've learned from a lot of great teachers. The Dr. John Van Epp says there's an acronym he calls FACES when we consider who we're looking for. And he says the F is family of origin, right? You can learn something And we don't get to do that as much because we're in such a disconnected world and everybody's moving at a frenetic pace. But not even that. I don't live. Back in the day, you lived where your mom lived and your grandparents lived, and everybody knew your family and your family knew my family. I couldn't even get home without getting in trouble first from the neighbor, and then I was going to catch it a second time when I got to see Dad's board of education, right? So family of origin. In other words, I need to be looking at where you came from and what I see when I watch you interact with them. He makes a funny statement. It won't necessarily jive with your audience, Thomas, but
I'll translate later.
It's OG. It's OG. You can look it up later.
He's doing an OG.
Ellie, he said, if you remember the Beverly Hillbillies, you cannot marry Ellie Mae without getting Jethro.
I like that.
Right? You're going to get the
that.
family of origin whether you want it or not because the apple isn't always falling too far from the tree.
Yeah.
That's good.
A is for acts and attitudes of conscience. In other words, you can tell about somebody's conscience not by what they say, but by their actions, what they do. And so you should be watching and observing what people do. C is compatibility. That means in every way, whether it's we like the same things or we enjoy the same hobbies, whatever. E is for examples of past relationships, right?
Yeah.
If you look at their last relationship, in fact, if you asked who was, because the name of his program is called How to Avoid Falling for a Jerk or a Jerkette. And he says, if you think about it, whenever you ask somebody who in the last relationship was the jerk, well, what's the answer?
Yeah, it's always that other
It's always
person.
the other person.
Yeah.
And he said, well, why don't you look at the examples of past relationships maybe to decide whether or not it was them or the other person, because that might be helpful. And then S finally is for relationship skills. Like, do they have the skills that allow people to be compatible and healthy in their relationships? Things
that's
like,
good.
again, communication, conflict resolution, conflict understanding, just many of the things that make for integrity. Like, what are the things that we look for that make us healthy and make for a good relationship?
I love all those. I
too.
think unpacking them is going to be a lot of fun. But that first one, I think about, where you're coming from. Everyone wants to skip over I've really not hung out with your folks. I know they're divorced. I know they live in 2 different states, but it's worth the effort. I might want to just meet them.
Right.
And we just want to skip that, and we don't think it'll bite us later.
I think it's interesting, and I feel like this is maybe tapping into one of the things that we talk about in the podcast, which is the massive generational gaps that exist. When we skip that, let me meet the parents phase.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us young people might think, well, that doesn't matter because that doesn't define them. And
Yes.
It's like, well, actually, you're missing a really big part of their development when you reject that part of it. So that fascinates me.
Well, and I think what you're trying to allude at least to is I can't fit you in that box, but Mama did say that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree.
That's right.
And in the South, we say you come by it honest. That just means if you look at Mom and Dad, you might have some indication, right?
Yeah.
My background is investments. There's a statement that I say everybody's an investor, even if they don't know, because I usually say this, they'll finish it. Past performance is no guarantee of future what?
Outcomes.
Yeah, results or outcomes. That's saying, I can't necessarily predict or guarantee what the future is going to look like based on the past, but dadgummit, if I don't make most of my decisions in life based on that.
Right.
Like I've driven my car 1,000 times or 100, whatever, without fatal or nothing. There's been no fatalities, at least on my side, yet. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to drive out of here today and lose it and get killed. So we do
Right.
make decisions based on past results, and it's probably wise to look at some of that.
Yeah, even I got to know your folks because you might be very reactionary to them, whatever them is. I don't know what them is. There's things that are going to be very annoying to you, or like it'll set you off. It'll push a certain button. And then if I know who your dad was or your mom is, I'm like, Oh, she thought I was doing that. I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah, that's not me.
But you know what? I stepped in naively because I never bothered to look around. And again, I think obviously, lots of grace, because I think it'd be easy to it's easier to paint these pictures and go, oh yeah, you only inherit the bad. You obviously inherit a lot of good too. But it is, I know in your marriage, especially premarital type stuff, some of the what did you like about growing up? What did you not like? So even if it's, well, I have a perfect role model of what I don't want our home to be. Okay, well, that's a starting point at least. As opposed to just assuming that we're just floating through and it's going to work out.
Right, this is going to miraculously end well.
Right.
When in fact, if you know the players, that might be asking for a lot.
Yeah.
Paul Tripp says, when two sinners marry each other, what did you expect?
Right.
I do remember that. I do want to loop back around to this conversation, but I want to address I have two things. One is an observation. The second one is more questions about getting to know you, Darin, a little more closely. The first thing is, Mr. Silver Fox, Robert, you've been a little bit sneaky tonight because you
have I?
You haven't,
Do tell.
You haven't
Do tell.
indicated that you actually have known Darin for quite a long time.
Darin and I are both fellow sailfish from
Sailfish.
Palm Beach
And
Atlantic
selfish.
University. And selfish.
In case that didn't
Yes.
alliterate.
You do have to pronunciate clearly when you are a sailfish person, because depending on where you come from, it could come out all wrong. But yes,
So you
Palm Beach
know
Atlantic University, which at that time we were just a lowly college, and now look at us.
That's right.
so you actually know a famous person.
I do know at least one famous person.
That's
That is
really
correct. That is correct.
Wow.
And yeah, and I think I know you like to get a little history on folks, but I find Darin's to be interesting. He mentioned before the investment world was
Yes, that's what I'm
part of
bringing
his
up.
scene, and then his life transitions, which I think a lot of folks could learn from. Of like, hey, Darin, how do you go from that to that, and what was that process look like? Because I bet there's other people out there who are like, I've thought about that, but I've been way too scared to pull that trigger.
Yeah, I guess what's the what's your autobiography? When were you born? What was growing up like? What got you into finances? What transitioned you into coaching? And bring us on a journey.
Well, if you talk about college days, that some of the prepositioning ideas or questions that Thomas had suggested I consider, good decisions, bad decisions, probably some of those are involved in my college years. But I actually had the opportunity as a senior in college to, on Senior's Day, get to hear from a former alumni, William Corley,
Okay.
Chip Corley. He came and spoke to our business class about being a stockbroker. And quite frankly, I don't know that I heard much, but I noticed the gold presidential Rolex on his arm.
For context, only because I happen to know him. He wouldn't remember me, but I do remember him. I think it was marine biology I had him. I will just say this. The dude knew how to make money. He just did. So I can envision, I never was at that speech. Maybe it would have got me in too. But I can see how, like, somebody comes up, he's like, bro, you want the big bucks? Let me just tell you how you do it. And I can only give a testimony and be like, yeah, he ain't lying. He did know how to make money ASAP.
Well, here's the fun thing at Palm Beach Atlantic, to which you refer, we had to go to chapel once a week. Mm-hmm. It was a requisite. So after
I thought it was a blessing, but you're right. We did have to go. Now that you mention it.
we got to go, excuse me.
We got to go.
Yeah.
We got to go every Wednesday.
You got to go. My time after that speech or that talk that he gave, I was going to be late for chapel because I stayed after and talked to him. And he said, well, let me drive you over there to the chapel. And it was in his gold Mercedes-Benz. So I was pretty much sold at that point that if I wanted to do that, that probably wouldn't be a bad way to go. But I interestingly think about the experience that gave me, one, in a very practical area of life. Jesus talks about money ostensibly as much, if almost as much as he does about the kingdom
That's
of
right.
God. That's the only
It
thing.
might annoy some of us, but it is a reality. He talks about it a lot more than heaven and hell put together.
Right. So, so I think that was a great foundational education for me. But really, what that allowed me to do was spend a lot of time with people. A book I once read said, "If you hear 5 life stories, you'll be a wealthy man. 5 life stories a day, you'll be a wealthy man." And I used to think, well, that means I need to get in front of 5 rich people, hear their story, and then ask them for money. But I now, in my latter years, would understand, no, that's just getting to glean from an audience of somebody who's experienced many things that you haven't. And so that relational education, I think, was one of the pieces that prepared me to be able to speak into people's lives for relationships. Because as you mentioned earlier, I've hung around a lot of different cats, and there's diversity and beauty in God's amazing creativity that if you get to experience, it can be wealthy. It can be a valuable education.
I like that a lot because I don't know that all of us would connect the dots that the investment world, and you're saying, well, I was in a world of people. It was a world of people was what I was. So the Lord had you on a boot camp for get to know people, hear their stories.
Just curious, would you say it as such that it was a boot camp, and did you intend it to be such, or did you?
No, I think back to the autobiography part. At 17, I surrendered my life to full-time Christian ministry because I thought God was calling me to that, and I, in my mind, thought that would have meant being a missionary or being a pastor on church staff somewhere. In retrospect, and having lived a lot of life, I think we're all called as believers and followers of Jesus to full-time Christian ministry. There are no part-time disciples. Jesus didn't give us that option. So I think we're all in full-time Christian ministry, and I think probably for the first 25 years, I thought, well, okay, then that means I can be a finance guy and do ministry. And of course, if you read Brother Lawrence, he said, well, I could wash dishes and worship God. And Martin Luther said, if you're going to make a shoe, make it a good one. So we're all called to vocations that may or may not be church-like or within the church, and it's still a way that we serve God and on purpose. So the finance piece for me really was, like you said, the introduction. I wouldn't have necessarily said, hey, a great segue from financial advisor and banker is to become a relationship coach and help people with their marriages. I don't know that I would have spun it that way, but I think you probably had lots of participants in these conversations that if Mama wasn't right, and she said, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans.
Yeah.
Right? That he's always up to something bigger
true.
and better. Isaiah 55 says his ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts, as high as the heavens are from the earth, and that's quite a distance. So I know that when we get to the measurement piece of this, I'm usually on the upside down portion.
When you chose finance, was obviously you had someone you looked up to who was very well off, at least judging by what they had. Was money the goal? Was provision for your family the goal?
At the time I wasn't. I don't know that I was thinking philanthropically. Certainly, it wasn't a virtuous idea.
Maybe after I have my gold Mercedes,
Sure,
then we'll get there. But
and
first
the gold
things first.
Rolex.
What about groceries? We'll go groceries, Mercedes, then philanthropy.
Yes, things that are more needy, more biological. But no, I don't think I will be the first to say I probably was wowed or wooed by the flair, right? The attraction of, hey, that's something I could do and make money. I don't know that I was ever on the path or the trail to how can I be Elon Musk, who wasn't a thing. Donald Trump was, by the way.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, he was a thing back then. Not not the thing he is now.
That's right.
Right. So yes, I could have said that would have been an aspiration, but no, I certainly there was a piece in there to provide for my family, to be a steward of God's resources. And to this day, I certainly say, God, if you want to bless me, I'm open. Right. And I'll give it away, but I don't think he works that way. I think he says, give it away, and then we'll see how it comes to you.
That's very interesting. What I guess it's maybe half and half with some of our guests so far, where some of them had that moment of like, I don't love the Lord. I'm gonna live how I want to live, and they come to Jesus moment. And correct me if I'm wrong, Darin. It kind of sounds like if you did have that rebellious phase, it would have been prior to college. And despite being a young man, your heart was still to serve the Lord.
Yeah, and I think even as to it relates to the consideration of bad choices, that would always be something I would lament that I didn't do that earlier. And even in college, when I was there under the supposition that was going to lead me to ministry or some type of position, I realized I didn't love Jesus like I needed to. So yeah, to your point, did I have a come to Jesus moment? I think we all have those. That expression troubles me a little in the sense that we all need them.
Yes.
Right. And they're not always hellfire and brimstone. They're sometimes epiphanies, or sometimes it's just a further realization that there's more to life than chasing after the gold Rolex or the gold Mercedes. And God's kingdom is full of all kinds of folks who need him. And how can we best and appropriately be equipped to serve and love and sacrifice and give our lives away for him?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, that being said, the transition from in finance to coaching, I would love to hear the story of how that happened, but also in the background as you're answering that question, I wonder, was it a hard decision to make? Did it feel like the right natural next step? What was that like?
Yeah, and like I say, I jokingly say, well, sure, it makes perfect sense that you should become a relationship educator after finance. They go together, but I think really it's about relationships, and that's what all of life is about. I'm kind of married to this idea, forgive the pun, that life is about relationships. And if you think about it, God, if he and Adam, if that's all he wanted was just those two to have a relationship, we wouldn't have needed Eve, and we wouldn't have had a world full of others that he invites us to interact with. So it must be about relationships. And to that end, I think for me at least, there were so many times where I knew that was what was at the core of his heart, and yet I easily got tangled up in following and chasing after other things. So 25 years I spent it in the finance world, and the longer version short is one day my wife happens to meet a person who is at a ministry in another town. Well, what was amazing was that lady had lived in another town and worked at a ministry and had a house in Lakeland. Well, I had a house in Tallahassee. I lived in Tallahassee and had a house in Lakeland, and I thought, well, why don't we just switch? And she said, well, after my wife said, it would be great if Darin could do something like you do in ministry. And she said, well, actually, there's an opening for the director of marriage programs. Literally, it was this quick, Thomas. I called the guy who eventually hired me, the CEO for the ministry. He talked to me on a Wednesday night. We had lunch on a Friday, and on Monday, I quit my day job as a commercial banker and said, "I'll, if you'll have me in the club, right?" I think it's one of the Groucho Marx said, "If you should never join a club that would have you as a member." But I said, if you'll let me in, I think I've been waiting for 25 years to do something that feels like that feels more ministry-like and feels like there might be something a little more eternal at the end of it. So I went to work at a nonprofit called Live the Life as their director of marriage programs. I say God has apparently very low standards. He'll let anybody in. He uses donkeys. Don't get ahead of yourself, Darin. But to that end, all I really had going for me was 30 years of a good marriage, not great, and a decision to follow and be faithful, and the humility to know that I probably needed to learn everything I could about what I was going to be teaching because my wife needed me to.
You know, that's actually really interesting. When I hear that story, and do correct me if I'm wrong, there's a book called Just Do Something, and maybe we'll have it in the show notes. But basically, it describes how it's pretty easy for us to over-spiritualize decision-making. And there are a lot of times through the revelation of Scripture and through our own knowledge of who God is that we can usually make pretty biblical decisions without having to necessarily fast and spend months in prayer and to seek everyone you know just to make sure they think it's a good idea. Obviously, it's hyperbole, but you get the idea. When I think about this career change you made, as you describe it, it almost sounds like it not that you didn't consider it, not that you didn't take your time, but you didn't spend more time than you needed to know from God that it was the right decision for you to make. Is that a fair assessment?
Sure, and I think this will sound weird. I heard somebody say it recently. People ask, well, what do you know? How do you know what love is? And most people will say, well, you just know.
Right.
And I think it was one of those kind of things. But also, again, the fact that he had prepared me from the age of 17 through so much life experience and things that would be valuable and helpful in ministry, it seemed like a natural next step. Again, nothing logical about it as far as the world would say. You don't move from finance to helping people with their marriages, but realistically, God did make it very clear to me. And I think you're right. So much of our decision-making process is probably overthought, overdone, right? I remember reading a book one time by a guy who said, it may just be that God doesn't care if you eat peanut butter cookies or, or chocolate chip or raisin. If you like raisin, go ahead and take that one, as long as there's nothing sinful about raisin cookies, right? And you're weighing it against the other things like you've mentioned, being in the Word, hearing from good counsel, maybe potentially just your circumstances and environment. I don't put a great deal of weight on the idea of I always have to have peace. I've heard people say, well, if I have a peace about it. No. Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane asking God to take away what was his purpose, and thankfully he didn't. But I think at that moment when he sweat drops of blood, he might not have been at peace.
Yeah.
And yet he was never closer and more perfectly aligned with God's will. Jonah is on a ship to Nineveh. He's sleeping, but he has never been further away from the will of God.
Yeah, he's at peace in all the wrong senses of the word.
Right. So I don't know that that's necessarily the litmus test.
And I suppose in that sense, in his situation, he knew what the right thing to do was. And perhaps that later brought him peace, but in the moment, he was probably feeling like, I know what I have to do, and I don't want to do it.
Right.
And I'm probably going to die, because at that point, he didn't know he would be swallowed up.
I think what's encouraging about, hearing Darin's story, everybody's story, some people might need several years of sweating drops of blood, trying to decide, should I go to seminary and maybe one day I will. And you're like, man, this is like a 20-year program the Lord has you on. I hope you get to it before you die, brother.
Right.
And then, but I think so all the above are fair game, and the Lord knows each of us. And there's some people, and it's like, no, you're going to do this really precise thing, and it's going to take me a really long time to get you ready for it. But I do like where the part of the thread of this conversation is that in Darin's case, it sounds like if the Lord has been working on you, and you're sitting in the vehicle and the light goes green, all things being equal, you might want to just hit the gas and go, my friend. Just go. Right. And also, knowing Darin a little bit, I do think that I think the Lord knows each of our personalities, and He knows your personality, and He knows your personality is like, hey, listen. I don't know if Paul will have to screen this or not. I got to think of another metaphor.
Ooh,
but something to do.
Tell. I think Paul will keep it in.
Something to do with, if it's time to go, it's time to go, right?
Sure.
And we all, I think, have quite a few friends in life that they have trouble like just pulling the trigger, making up their minds, and then they observe other people and they're like, man, I should learn to be more like that. Like, if the Lord is in it, let's go for it. And then I love what Darin just said there before. I often recall in the Old Testament, there's the one guy who's told, because normally we think, oh, Lord, I got to know, do I eat the peanut butter or do I eat the raisins? Which one is of the Lord? And the Lord, to this guy's case, goes, listen, you can turn to the left or you can turn to the right. I'm going to bless you either way, my friend.
Either way.
So kind of overthinking it and I don't know, making it something that it's not meant to be, and then maybe ignoring, it's basically your way of stalling for time. It's actually just being disobedient. Let's just call it what it is.
Dang.
And you're like, no, Lord, but when this becomes more clear, and He's like, I've been abundantly clear. Jonah, was I clear with you? I feel like I was. So oftentimes we know the right decision, but we're just thinking of excuses. The answer, there's actually a book, and I won't get the title. I'll paraphrase it poorly, but the answer to how is why, I think is what it is. But it's basically if you constantly find yourself saying, well, I'd be willing to do that, but please tell me how first. Tell me how. Tell me the details, how it's going to work out. I need to see the full roadmap. And it's like, no. You just go. Just go. Take your baby step. Just do today. Yeah. Just do today.
Move in some direction.
So what you on the outside, it would appear to be like a big career change. And in many ways, looking back, it's like, well, actually the Lord, similar skill sets. I think what's encouraging and fun is like the thought of on a given Wednesday, you're doing one thing, and then by the following Monday, you may have reorbed your life. But I love the reminder. It comes with angst, not just peace. There can be times of peace, but angst would also be like, I know I'm supposed to do this, and I know on Monday I'm going to turn in my notice. But I also know I got a little bit of heartburn right now.
Oh, yeah.
Because these are friends of mine, and I'm going to break their hearts.
Well, that's it. And that's the part of the story I'd probably be remiss, not that these people would be listening, but one of them was my friend who took a chance on me and moved me to Tallahassee with a move and relocation and all that. And there it is on my 1-year anniversary with the company after I'm being groomed to be the next big guy for the commercial division. I say, sorry, peace out, drop the deuces.
Right.
I think God's calling me to go in a different direction. And what ultimately made that a little easier was the CEO of the company is a very devout, God-fearing woman. And she said, goodness, far be it from me to stand in the way of what God's telling you to do. And I know that she really meant that, even though it had a cost. Right. They had put a lot of money in.
Cost them something too.
Right. So, you're right. There's always some kind of cost. I was thinking about a question you'd indirectly alluded to in our pre-conversation, but even tonight, like what's the thing people could learn particularly or potentially from my experience? I think it would be you can serve God in so many different ways and be in full-time ministry. And to not pigeonhole God into the idea that it has to look like I'm getting a paycheck from a religious organization. that God uses people and he needs them in every facet of life. And as far as the decision making is, allow God to use your experience. He's not wasting anything.
That's good.
Right? He's always up to something. And if we believe Romans 8, it's always something for our good. Even when we may not see it at the time, almost most of the time we can look back and say, aha, that's what you are up to. Not always. Sometimes I still scratch my head and say, not sure what that was about, but I think God is, in the same way that they picked up 12 baskets full of bread after he fed the 5,000 a couple times, he's not wasting anything.
By the way, just a fun fact for listeners out there. I find that oftentimes you'll realize later Thomas is asking these questions for himself.
Yep.
And you'll go, oh, he did a good job of like asking on behalf of somebody else. But actually, if you know what's going on in the life of Thomas at the time, you're like, oh no, he genuinely is literally weighing the pros and cons of quote unquote ministry life versus quote unquote marketplace.
That is true. That's how I stay authentic.
That's how you stay authentic.
Well, I mean, honestly, that's true. And I guess to open up in that regard, I've done ministry and I've loved it. I've done corporate work and I've not liked it as much. And I've done self-employment, owned my own business, and I've enjoyed parts of that too. Maybe one of them stands out, and I shouldn't say it like that. But basically, people who are listening who are well entrenched in a career, and they're going to find out maybe through, Lord, if the Lord allows it, through this conversation to say, well, you know what? It's funny because in the back of my mind, I had this inkling that I'm supposed to be doing something else. And we pray that is from God, and that
Amen.
Conviction, bears fruit. Other people they're going to be reassured. I did exactly what I felt the Lord told me to do, and I feel very content where I am, despite whatever challenges that career may hold. But I'm doing what God wants me to do.
Yeah, I think the healthier the conversation, I'm glad we're having this. It came up in a couple of our episodes before, by the way. I don't know if you noticed this. There's a little theme here. But there needs to be a wide range of recognizing priesthood of the believer. I mean, theologically we admit to it, but if you observe how we behave, we don't tend to honor it very much because we kind of act like, well, I think God likes that guy a little bit more because, he's in that upper echelon. And the rest of you schmucks just show up and hand out bulletins if you don't mind. And so we have to do a better job of making sure that people do understand, hey, the Lord needs his people in all the realms. He loves it when it works that way. The Apostle Paul, as our example, doesn't draw these harsh lines. He's like, yep, tent maker, that's who I am. He had a lot of other chores on his hands that were ministry related, and yet he never went to the point of saying, guys, this is why I'm more special than you. I'm different than you. I'm just a little bit better than the rest of you. He goes, no, this is what we need. So I definitely, if we could get to a generation where we probably at the foot of the cross is a little more level playing field. We're all in ministry in a sense.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, there is no pecking order. There's not two classes of Christians, first class, second class. And then at the same time to recognize that there might be seasons where you realize there's an aspect of ministry for me to do, where to do this, I might have to make a tough decision. And so then it's like, oh, well, all of a sudden. So there's nothing wrong with the guy who stays in the finance world his whole life.
Right.
And we're not going to say he got into ministry or got out of ministry. It's all one and the same. But at the same time, there's seasons of life where you might recognize a tough decision because you're like, I think he's asking me to spend more time coaching into the lives of these marriage relationships. And I could do that while currently involved in the investment world, but I think more of my time should be dedicated here in this next season. So they are both in, and it's very. I think we get in trouble when we try to cheat and ask the Lord to I just need you to just give me this secret answer for just me. And I think he makes us do our own homework just a little bit.
Yeah.
What specifically is the Lord asking you to do? And don't do what, the Apostle Peter says about John. Well, what's
Right.
going to happen to that guy?
Right.
What's his story? And the Lord's, listen, you got enough to worry about with just you. Don't worry about if that guy's
Take care of
in
my
ministry or out of ministry, or this guy did it right because he did finance and then he did this. Yeah, you might want to listen to the Lord. And what is the assignment that he has for you, even just this week? And let's focus on that and be fully invested in your marriage that you're in this week and the job that you have this week, whatever that might look like.
Well, and that's funny that you say that, because a guy I would call my mentor in the faith at Northwood Baptist, where he was my pastor, and there was a sign as you would leave the parking lot, and it'd say, "You are now entering the mission field." Right? That's where life's happening, is out there in the marketplace or at your house or in the neighborhood, wherever it is you're going. That's where mission and ministry occurs.
I suppose, this kind of makes me ask the question in my mind as we're talking about decision making, we're talking about vocation, and ultimately as Christians, we always have a job in the kingdom of God. It might, apply to different sectors or be in certain niches, but everyone still has the same task. I'm curious how this might circle back to your coaching experiences when you're meeting with individuals or couples. Purpose is kind of at the bedrock of a lot of our decision making. And I wonder, in your experience, when it comes to purpose, when it comes to counseling people in their marriage, how many times do you find that people are misaligned in making their marriage the priority, their work the priority, as opposed to having their faith and their dedication to the mission as the priority?
Well, again, I think it goes back to the original idea that I was suggesting. I'm firmly committed to this idea that relationships are what life's about. And that sounds nebulous or somewhat vague, but in the sense that when God says to Adam, first of all, what he says is, the way the story reads, he brought the animals to Adam to see what he would name them. But what I now believe and have been taught is really for the first time, Adam realized in that moment he was alone. Right? That he said, he saw, there's a male sheep and a female sheep and a male lion and a female lion.
Everything's great, but I don't relate to anybody right now.
And he says, he doesn't say at that moment, well, I'm alone, but God does. God says you're alone. And yet we would say, well, there's animals. And more importantly, we would say, well, but God was there, so how could he be alone? But it was to the point that you make that there was not another one like him. And so God has to put Adam to sleep, because otherwise the brother would have thought he did something good in Eve's creation because she came from him, right? But he makes a relationship. It happens to be a wife, but it could have been any type of relationship. That's the one he chose. And that was to say that life is about relationships. God and I could have been perfectly fine with each other in heaven, but he leaves us on earth here to do relationships with broken people, by the way, to learn how to become more like him in dealing with us. And so I think, to your purpose question, that's probably what's going on in every relationship, is we've misidentified what God's ideal is in that, right? Now, marriage specifically, I think, images God's relationship to the church, he says. But the fact is, God creates because he's in a perfect relationship with himself. Father, Son, and Spirit are in a triune relationship. And I think this is the way, in my mind, I imagine he says, this is such a great thing, I can't keep this to myself.
Right, that's right.
I got to create so that they can enjoy me and each other. And so it's got to be that there's something bigger going on than just what our title may be, whether that's because I say when I think about relationships, it's about all the mates. It's about bunk mates, cellmates, inmates, teammates, workmates, playmates, and soulmates. And so God's invested heavily in people because that's what he loves.
I like that. That's good.
The story of Adam and Eve, that like with that little shift in perspective for me kind of made me realize like, okay, so to some extent God helps Adam have a revelation that he is alone. And then as soon as the first thing goes wrong, there's a betrayal in the community that God's given us. And that we see that all the time in marriages and friendships. And we betray each other so quickly too.
And then we kick each other under the bus. Remember what happens is immediately it causes Adam to want to hide, which is from the enemy, and it's purposeful. But the first thing he does is we think he's saying, along with Jimmy Buffett, it's that woman you put me here. 'Cause Jimmy says, well, he kicked a bottle top, cut his foot,
right.
whatever. And somewhere there's a woman to blame.
Don't blame the woman, says Jimmy.
Right.
Even Jimmy acknowledges, you're chasing the wrong
it's
answer.
my own dadgum fault. But
Yes.
the point is, even then Adam says, well, it's this woman you put me here with, Lord. He's not even blaming Eve as much as he's saying, well, clearly, God, it was your fault.
Yeah.
I messed up because you put me with this woman.
To whatever extent there's a snake in the garden and he is called the accuser, he sees God has this plan and it's all about relationship and it's all about the mates. So how do I undo that? How do I do subterfuge in God's plan? Get them to turn on each other.
Sure.
Right? So that's...
Break that thing up.
That's his a number one tool, whatever he can do to help drive a wedge between brother and brother, marriage, you name it, church life. I do like your emphasis though, especially because when we think as Americans, we think about like building a life for ourselves. Like you got a career and you're going to have advancement, you have whatever, your goodies. And oh, by the way, then I guess for good measure, let's add a significant other or relationships, right? We're just going to throw that on as like on the top when we're done.
Because that will fulfill me.
Because then that's right.
That's what
right.
this is about.
That's the
me.
one thing I'm missing because I'm kind of lonely and it's bored and I miss the sex. So let's add that one more thing, Lord. And it's like if you take it back and you see the world through the Lord's eyes, and if you think about what you just reminded us there, that it's all about the mates, then you realize, oh, wait, I built the castle made out of sand, and now I'm trying to plop relationship on top, and I'm a little surprised it's not as easy as I hoped it would be. And the Lord goes, well, yeah, my design all along was that everything you do, you got to be paying attention to everybody else around you.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point you make because I don't think anyone disagrees with the sentiment that like life is about the mates. But in practice, it can become very, very difficult, or at least we might start disagreeing with the statement. And the reason I say that is because, one of the things we even talked about before jumping on, it's like, divorce rates crazy high. And nowadays, in my generation, people aren't getting married, people aren't having kids. It's becoming less and less.
Commitment in general, commitment relationships.
Life is becoming less and less about the mate. It appears to be that appears to be the case. Is that true in your experience that it's becoming less about the mates, or it's just changing?
Well, it's interesting you say that because, when I first started doing this many years ago, the divorce rate was increasing.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And we would talk about, well, how do we bring the divorce rate down? Well,
we have, but it's not for a good reason.
Unfortunately, it's actually in many cases decreasing, but it's not because less people are getting divorced. It's because less people are getting married. Obviously, if you don't get married, you can't mess with the divorce rate, right? You're right. There is a generation that's, if they're getting married, they're taking a lot longer, and ultimately there is a clear apprehension for commitment.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What do you think that stems from?
It's funny. You were talking about, Robert, how we make this about us. So I laughingly say T.O., Torello, and says, I love me some me, right? But we all do. And this is almost always about me, and if it's not, then it's no fun, and I'll move on to something else. But yet to that end, it's age old as the garden. If I make this about me, then I missed God's entire point. God's always about the other, right? He's a first stepper towards the other, and he invites us into modeling him in that decision to live life for someone else and not just for yourself, because that's where we find our greatest sense of fulfillment. And there's nothing. It's probably not even intuitive. I'd say it's not. In fact, often things in God's kingdom seem to be. I've had an epiphany about this. I've heard people say, "Well, God's kingdom is upside down," but it occurred to me recently. No, mine is. His is perfectly upright. Mine is, because it's polar opposite. In fact, it's upside down. But
That's very interesting.
To that end, yeah, I make it about me, and God's always been about, no, it's about you. It's about me creating you, about me loving you, about me wanting you to have a relationship with me. And I will go to the cross and die. I'll send my son there for you so that you can be in a relationship with me, because I'm more interested in you than I am me.
Just to kind of spin this a little more, but so there's the young women perspective and the young men perspective as it relates to marriage specifically. And I, from what I've learned and heard, for the young man's perspective, they would say, well, why would I get married when my options are a woman who has not been faithful, even before a relationship began, they were unfaithful to the commitments of remaining pure and protecting the beauty that God's given them. So why would I want to engage in that? And secondly, those behaviors are indicative of it's about me. It's about me. So why would a young man subject himself to that? The flip side for the women might be, well, there's no guy who truly meets my standard, who's actually going to prioritize me over themselves. And so there is this kind of war, and they're all basically saying the same things. They have different peripheral subjects that they draw from. But as I say this, as I'm working this out in my mind, I suppose if we're being honest, perhaps we don't want to marry each other because we're all being selfish and we don't like that about the other sex. Is that a fair assessment in my little
I just want to know the names of these people you're talking about, because they got to be real people. There's no way these two people who happen to embody an entire generation. I'm glad Darin's here to unpack that one, though. That's good. Good luck on that one, man.
I'm looking to Paul.
I'm not sure what your rates are, but you might want to double. Yeah, Paul, the producer. You want to be the smartest guy in the room?
He is the smartest guy in the room. He's
prove it now.
Probably got a better answer than I do. Well, it's funny. In the pool I swim in, it looks a lot like psychology because it borrows a lot of the same tenets. We say it's not therapy, but hopefully it's highly therapeutic what we do. But we're talking about why people do what they do.
Right.
Well, so there's this label that I hear a lot lately, especially from spouses about their spouse. Well, they're a narcissist. I read a book and they're a narcissist. And
I found that, suddenly they're everywhere.
Apparently.
Yeah,
right?
there's like 90% of America is now narcissists.
Well, and I'm married to one almost entirely, right? But I mean, or everybody I coach and counsel is. I think what is somewhat laughable, if not interesting about that is we're all narcissists.
Right, that's right.
I'm a narcissist. Right. I love me some me.
Yeah, I think we're...
Right? Give me the opportunity to put myself first.
Yes.
On a bad day or maybe even I will. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's probably just indicative of the fact that we're all very self-centric and me-focused, and it is about me after all. And if I live that way, then I miss entirely the beauty of God's other people calling. In other words, the Bible has 59 invitations to one another, each other.
Right.
Right, to love one another, encourage one another, build one another, forgive one another, have compassion for one another. That God's world it's about the other, and yet left to our own devices in our deprivation and narcissism, no, it's about me. And so, yeah, what a recipe for disaster.
I do like that because I think, it reminds us the sinfulness of man is not like a new phenomenon. Sometimes you hear people describe a certain generation or these days, and it's like, well, we were always selfish.
Sure. Now, is it selfish or selfish?
Sailfish. Go fish. But it just looked differently in different generations, perhaps. But at the core of its being, it's still this relationship with the Lord, and He's trying to rewire our hearts where we're not just constantly looking out for ourselves. So that's why I think even like looking at it like a divorce rate, it's like, oh, but this society must be better off because their divorce rate isn't as bad. I'm like, have you seen all the black eyes in their marriages? Like, no, just grabbing a statistic isn't going to help us get there.
Right.
Another one that comes up a lot if you've lived in different cultures would be things like that culture's they're more in tune with the spirit because they have lots of children. And I'm like, they're so dirt poor. They have lots of children in hopes that one of them will live to take care of them in their old age. It doesn't mean they think kids are cute. It doesn't mean that they're more loving. It's a retirement place. So
I thought it was just because they didn't have TVs. So what were our other
9
options?
months
It could
after
be all those things.
9 months after a hurricane, when the power goes out and there's nothing else to do, right? But yeah, we can get lost in sort of like our generation has these challenges and we can't figure it out. And it's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure selfishness was a thing the previous, and it just looks different on the surface. Or you might look and you say, yeah, but they looked better. They had more of an image and it looked good. And I'm like, yeah, but if you looked under the hood,
right,
were husbands and wives truly loving each other and learning to be unselfish and all those kinds of things. So I think in a weird way, I find it encouraging, and I would want to encourage any generation to think like that because, again, I feel like at times, especially the way we don't have like real news channels anymore, and you can just sort of be misinformed and you're like, you know what? It's true.
Fake news is a real thing.
You can't find a good man out there. There is no such thing as one. And you're just like, well, I don't know if that's going to help you, that thinking. And vice versa. It's just sort of like, yes, you're correct. This entire generation is hopelessly doomed, and the Lord has no plan to help you out. I mean, the Lord is just going, oh my gosh, it's gone too far. I can't get this one back. He's like, he's so stressed out. All the other ones I was able to solve, but this one's unsolvable. But yeah, it's look at the Bible and look at those characters, and you go, wow, I thought this guy was like a hero. And then he had his selfish moment, and I can't believe how he screwed up the family that quickly. So I think there's solace in the fact that the Bible is honest. The Lord shares stories of other people who are a hot mess, just like we're all hot messes. And then there's the grace of the Lord, and there's the glimmers of, we are in the image of God, because at times I see the good things the way He must have designed them. And then there's times where I have it so backwards and it's so inside out because in my sinfulness I've misread a situation, or I've convinced myself that everybody in my life is just horrible people, and it's always their fault.
Yeah.
Which leads, of course, to self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Once you've declared them to be so, they will usually be so.
Absolutely.
So, that leads me to the practical question, which is, so if we accept the fact that we're all at our worst all narcissists, and if we all, those who claim Christ, have a purpose, a mission, a job of fulfilling the Great Commission to go and make disciples, to spread the word of God, to spread the hope of Jesus. So if we're all narcissists and we still have that job, how might we go from there, Darin?
The Darin Saley anti-narcissist campaign has begun.
That's right.
America, look out, because it starts now.
I feel a strong and sudden urge to call on Paul.
You can only use one Paul card, and he wants to use it now.
Well, yeah, I remember that it was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You could phone
That's
a
right.
friend.
That's right.
Paul's my guy.
Ring, ring.
Yeah, because Thomas just asked, what do we do with humanity and the gospel? And
I guess that was.
I'm supposed to give
loaded?
an answer.
Was that a little loaded? Fix us, please.
It's so funny. Paul Tripp, I quote him because
Because he's got that cool mustache.
right, because I quote a lot of people who are smarter than me, and that's most everybody. There's always somebody smarter in the room than me, Paul. So don't get ahead of yourself. But he said, if you want to know just how selfish you are and how much in need of sanctification you are, you should get married.
That's good.
And then if that's not enough, have kids. Right? That I think, Thomas, the answer is God is using that to help us become aware of our need for a Savior, to help us become aware of our need for sanctification and the way He purifies. If you think about how a goldsmith or a metaller just purifies metal, it's with heat, right? Well, put yourself in any close relationship and you're never going to get more heat, right? That you find out what's in you.
Yeah.
And that's what the heat does. It doesn't create the imperfections. It just reveals what metallurgists would call the dross. And you heat it up, and the dross comes to the top, and you scrape it off, and you heat it up, and rinse, repeat, lather, and you keep doing that until, and I love this analogy, the goldsmith knows when gold is pure when he can see his reflection. And that's what God's doing, right? He's using these crazy relationships, of which I are a participant. But by the way, do you remember? I don't know if it was if you're not as
This is
slow.
probably Tripp. Let's just quote Tripp.
Well, I was about to say if you're as slow as I am, maybe this happened later. But at some point, you did fractions, right? Again, maybe it was elementary school. For you, for me, that was my 12th grade review for the SAT or whatever. And what were we looking for in fractions? The common what?
Denominator.
And so what I've learned in this relationship field that I'm in is the common denominator of every relationship that you've ever had a problem in is...
You're often there, aren't you?
Well, not me. Yeah, don't say
Not
you.
you, me.
Yeah, me.
Yeah, don't say you, it's me.
It's Paul.
Right.
Paul is always in my relationships.
That therein lies the problem. It's me.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so if I don't allow the Holy Spirit and God through His redemptive work of grace to change me, there's no hope for any relationship.
That's good. That's really
But
good.
as I begin to do that and focus the heat and the mirror and the reflection on me, and if I'm doing that while you're doing that, man, now we got a chance.
So right as that marriage is coming in and it's starting to press and it's starting to heat up and it's actually going to help and it's going to reveal and it's going to get us somewhere, then my first thought is going to be, get that person away from me,
Sure.
right? So right when it's about to do its best work, and
Well,
is when I'm
unfortunately-
like gonna.
Unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. And I think you talk about divorce rates, and not even just that, but there's a natural cycle of relationships which basically ends with us having to make a decision. Do I want to go back to what we call the beginning stage of illusion, where everything was good and right, and the chemicals were all flowing, and dopamine was a thing, and you could do no wrong, which quickly slides into disillusionment, where I start to say, well, what happened to my knight in shining armor or my
little princess who never
right?
argues with me.
Right. And then I move ultimately to confusion, which means I have to make a decision. am I going to take the bait that the problem is really them? Because if I can look at it and say, well, you're the problem in this relationship, so I'm going to exit my way out and go find a new one. But now we go back to the cycle again.
Yeah.
Eventually you'll be back to the conclusion of, oh, I've been the problem all along. And if I don't work on me and allow God to, through his Spirit to work on me, I'm going to perpetuate this terrible cycle of destruction, divorce, and death.
That's good. I like that. I'm not sure what the rates are once again, but I think that right there is the golden nugget worth all the rates, whatever you're charging. That's really good. That's really good. And unfortunately, you're right. I see a lot of folks, certainly the demographic we spend more time with, it's like they're constantly throw it all out, start over. Throw it all out, start over. And it's just like, man.
From appliances to people.
Yeah, you're
It's
barely,
disposable.
it's
Just get it
almost
out.
about to start to go somewhere and get good. And that's the moment you're like, nope, it's another horrible human in my life and I got to chunk them.
And I suppose that moment that you're describing is like when you're about to face the biggest difficulties with them, the relational hurdles of like, I know a number of people just recently. It's like, I don't spend time with that person anymore. What happened? Well, they alluded to saying this thing, and because they alluded to it, I figured they meant this, and I don't want to spend time with them anymore.
What I just heard you say is you deluded yourself into thinking they said that. They never really said that.
Yeah. So what happened when you talk to them about it? Oh, it's not even worth it. Bro.
Right,
Like, not even worth it.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
I'm gonna let it go.
Yeah.
No, that's when it's getting good. To your point.
Yeah, well, that's no, that's good. That's really good. And if only a couple of listeners out there go, you know what? I think I see a pattern here. I want to change that. I'm chunking too many people.
Yeah.
And let's hope you only chunked a couple of college roommates and a couple of early friends in life before you got to the marriage part and chunked her. But sooner than later, let's quit chunking people.
Right.
Let's follow through.
It's funny. I always think about there was a celebrity actress who was being interviewed by another celebrity, and he asked her, well, what was that 7 marriages about? And she said, I just wanted to live in the moment. And it occurred to me, what's the problem with that? Well, it's that a moment's only a moment.
Yeah, yeah.
And I jokingly say this. I've done a lot of work with homeless, and my homeless guys say some of the most intelligent things. But one of them, we used to say, well, the problem is wherever I go, I take me with me.
Right, yeah.
Now, I don't know if he said it with a country accent. It's Polk County, man.
Yeah, it's Polk County homeless.
But I know what he was intimating is that if when I'm really thinking clearly, I realize, no, the problem is not necessarily you. You may be a part of it, but if I always look outside for the problem, then I'm missing all the hard work and all the stuff that can actually change.
Yeah.
That this is an internal thing.
Yeah.
I'm my biggest problem, not you.
That's good. That's good.
And it's this came to my mind as we're addressing this. I'm thinking, okay, well, what are some ways that we can put ourselves in an environment where those presuppositions about us being the center of the universe can be challenged? And like you're saying, it's with people. We're doing this book. Our church is doing this book, and it's called "Made for People" by Justin Earley. I don't know.
It's early.
It's early enough, that's for sure.
It's spelled funky, but British people do that.
So, I didn't know he's British.
You throw an E in there, and it's not a word. It's only a name.
Sure enough.
But then people don't know how to pronounce it anymore.
I thought you were saying it's early. Like I feel like we've been on for a while.
The night has just begun.
Yeah.
This is how we soften them up.
So in this, we're just getting
Truth serum comes out.
There's this quote that it stuck to me. I really, really like it. And it's all about relationships. We need people, very much like you're saying. And one of the core things they talk about in finding solid friendships is oftentimes we can have the temptation to look for people who accept us, quote unquote, as we are. And he says, well, but that's assuming who you are is who you ought to be. And so I guess to combat that mentality is wait, do I actually like mess up and do things wrong and incorrectly? Then maybe I'm not who I ought to be. And if I'm around people who are telling me that I am who I ought to be, well, then maybe they're wrong too, and I need to spend time with people who will challenge me.
Yeah. So, grace, we usually apply it to the part of accept me as I am, but we're uncomfortable with the idea of, yeah, but I also need to grow up a lot too. So,
Sure.
are my friends allowed to say, hey, man, that fourth drink, I think that's the one that did you in. You probably should have stopped. Or, hey, do you mind if I be honest? Like, when you're around that one person, you're not at your best. Do we allow that? Or is our concept of grace, it's like, no. Jesus loves me like Santa Claus, takes me as I am and leaves me there. But grace is not just loving you as you are, but also seeing the future you and seeing that. I hope that when I met you and you were 18 years old, I hope you weren't done growing at the ripe old age of 18. I hope this was just the start of a life. So yeah, the whole, that moment where you realize, wait, this other person, what if they stretch me a little? What if they make it uncomfortable? Because I do have to maybe change some of my things and grow up and see the Lord better than I do today.
Well, it's interesting. I was with a couple yesterday, and he's in his 60s, and the wife asked, but can he change? And I said, well, he's right here. Why don't we ask him?
By the way, full disclosure, her name was Julie, and I'm not 60, but she might think I am.
That's right. Yes, it very well could have been my wife, Deborah. No, and I said, well, let me offer you both some hope and some encouragement. It's something I've learned. IQ, intelligence quotient, beyond a certain point never increases. They say it's generally somewhere around your 18, 19, 20s, your late teens. In other words, you're never going to have a higher IQ than you did at that point. Now, Paul may be the exception to the rule. But,
Absolutely, he is.
but the rest of us, right? But EQ, emotional intelligence, is not chronological. It's not limited. We can always be growing. That part of us can always expand and mature. In the same way that 80-year-old emotional infants, and some cats who are younger than you are, and yet they are very emotionally intelligent, right? They have a maturity that's well beyond themselves. And so I think to this audience, hey, there's always room for growth. No matter where you're at, no matter what stage you find yourself in, emotional intelligence, we all have a capacity to get better.
That's good. That's good too. Because I'm thinking of a couple of maybe they're gentlemen in the group. I could be wrong, but they're thinking basically, yeah. But if I could just get married, then I'd be done. I would be at the peak of the mountain, and I'd be
Check
done.
the
It's
box, close the door.
Actually, we're still getting started. But yeah, that's so healthy, and the idea of you're just not done. You're not done. I hope you're not done. No matter what your age is. But that's good. I like that. And again, sorry we had to give away the names on that couple.
True.
It was for their own good.
Deborah Sue.
Deborah Sue. Hey, I feel like we have gotten great stuff out of Darin, but I don't want to wear him out.
That's true.
Well, and I'll say this as my parting shot, since we're landing the plane after we've flown a few circles around the tower.
We did have radio control ask us to do 5 extra laps, but you're right. This is the final descent.
Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it to the full. And so I have to imagine in the heart of a good father, he really wants me to have a complete, vibrant, blooming, blossoming life and get out there and find it.
A lot to be an adventure.
Thank you, Darin Saley. Appreciate your time.
Yes. Thank you for being here, and thank you for joining and listening. Hey, if you have any questions, any thoughts, any musings, any considerations,
write it out below and mention Paul by name.
That's right. Go ahead and leave a comment and like and subscribe, because I'm supposed to say that. So, but if you want to do it, I wouldn't stop you. So go ahead, and we'll see you next time.